Hello, A-pushers, right? Today's video notes are going to be honestly a quick and dirty version of the US entry into World War I, the home front of World War I, and the end of the war. So again, these are extremely brief, but again, we're going to get through all this stuff. Anytime you see a video link that is in the that's in here, I'll put it in the description below. Please go ahead and look through those. They're going to be really helpful of going over a lot of stuff. Now, obviously, we're only going to briefly talk about how the war got started in Europe. We're really going to just focus on the United States. And again, the United States was not involved in the war very much. All right, so let's get started. All right, so when we first think of World War I, we usually think of the main MAIN causes of the war, right? And I call these as militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, right? So real quick, just for that militarism thing, right, we got some charts here. We're seeing that Germany is really increasing their military, right? They want to start to take over some of these places that are nearby. Right? Your first alliances here at the beginning of the war, you have the Allied powers, right? So we have the British, the French, all right, the Russians and the Serbians, all right? And then on the Central Powers, all right, we have the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Ottoman Empire. So these are all your empires at this time, all right? When we start talking about the war itself, when the United States comes in, once the Russians leave and they will then become the Soviet Union, becoming a communist country, the United States will take their place. Right, to kind of go over some stuff with imperialism, we got a nice little map here, right, and it shows us that all of these places that are colored have been taken over by some country that is an imperialistic power, right? These central powers here, located centrally in Europe, they don't have any place really to go that's left. They have a few places here and there throughout Africa, but again, they need to take over other countries to take their possessions. Right, and here's a really interesting political cartoon from the time on nationalism. Right, all of these countries want to be better than everyone else, right, and it's their country opposed to everyone else. And I really love this picture here of the Russians trying to kind of eat all of the other countries. But it gives you an idea of that national pride, which when we talked about imperialism was jingoism, and that's extreme nationalism. And so that's kind of a flow over here into the First World War, right? From world history, you should remember, all right, that all of this, the spark that really starts the war is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Here we have him in Lego form, right? And so he is going to be killed by a group of people called the Black Hand, which is a Serbian nationalist group that wants to be independent from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Right? And again, a lot of those extra details for the beginnings of the war, look back into your stuff from world history and review it that way. There's also a lot of crash course videos, especially Crash Course World History, where you can review some more of those extra details. But again, we're going to focus more on what's happening with the United States. Right? So remember that we have those webs of alliances, so you can go back a little bit in the video to see which countries are in the Central Powers and which ones are the Allied powers. The United States is going to stay isolated, right? Throughout our video today, we're going to have lots of primary sources, all right, and secondary sources that we're going to look through, so I'm going to read those for you guys to give us a sense of what's going on, of what is happening with the United States, where their decision making is going to be, right? And most of the time with the United States, we want to figure out, well, why do they want to stay isolated? Is it for political reason? Is it for economic reasons? What's going on? So here we have a source from Woodrow Wilson, who was president at the time, right? And this is in 1914. Right, so we have the people of the United States are drawn from many nations and chiefly from the nations now at war. It is natural and inevitable that some will wish one nation over others another to succeed in momentous struggle. So basically, we're a nation of immigrants. If we join one side or the other, we're going to have people in our country from both sides of this war. So hence kind of a need to stay neutral. Such divisions amongst us would be fatal in our peace of mind and might seriously stand in our way of our duty as one great nation at peace, the one nation ready to play a part of mediator and counselor of peace. So we're kind of like, hey, at the end of the war, if we're neutral, we can mediate the peace and, get a piece of this pie for ourselves. The United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name during these days that are to try men's souls. We must be impartial in thought as well as action. Right. So again, Wilson has some good ideas here. Right. I definitely agree with this first part that we have people in our country from both sides of this war, so it would be really hard for us to pick one side over the other. Then we have the political part here of being the mediator at the end of the war, making us look really, really good. Right. So let's have a real quick look at a map, right? Because again, sometimes our geography of Europe is not always on point, but that's what we got maps, we got to look at them. So our central powers are these centrally located countries here in this mint green color, right? And then our allied powers are going to be in the tan color. So you can kind of see them all over here, mostly Western Europe, but we also have the Russians involved as well. Pink countries are going to be neutral. Right? One of the places we're going to talk about a lot is right into here, this border between Germany and France, and then we have neutral Belgium. It's going to be kind of a interesting location of what's happening there. Now, some other review stuff from world history is that you should remember stuff about trench warfare, right? If you have some extra time and have access to things, definitely I'd watch the movie 1917 that just came out. It has some really good stuff going on with how trench warfare is working. It does a really good job of really showing the craziness that is World War I. Along with this stuff, you had with your trench warfare, no man's land, right? So again, all this stuff should be reviewed from world history. We unfortunately are not going to really talk that much about battles because the United States comes in so late in the war that our entry kind of helps bridge that turning point with the battle in Paris, and then the war's over. So we're going to more focus on what's happening on the home front and what gets us involved in the war here at the beginning. All right, so for our beginnings of U.S. entry, we're going to really focus on British propaganda. All right, now in older units, we talked about the telegraph and how we ended up having this transcontinental, or not transcontinental, sorry, transatlantic telegraph line that went to Europe and connected us, right? Well, the British, they're going to cut the line that connects us to mainland Europe. So any information we're going to get from Europe has to go through the British line, right? And so they're going to make sure that we are only going to get information that is going to benefit them, right? And their cause, which would be the Allies, right? So we're going to start off with the Schieffeling Plan, right? I don't have animations turned on here, so bear with me on this, but the rest of everything will be fine, right? So here we have a map of, this is the border here of Germany's over here, France is over here, and in between is neutral Belgium, right? So the French are going to naturally, against their enemies, going to be putting a line of soldiers here, right, along the French and German border. Okay, so that makes sense, right? The Germans aren't going to be attacking here because they're going to be facing the full force of the French military. So they're going to have a sneak attack where they are going to go through neutral Belgium, right, and attack the French lines from behind, right? Now, this is a perfectly good plan. However, Belgium is a neutral country. Since Belgium is neutral, which we saw on that map earlier, right, they're supposed to be left out of the war. They're not supposed to be involved, right? And the Germans aren't just going to like mosey on through the country and not do anything while they're there. There's going to be all sorts of craziness that's going to happen while they're going through cities and towns, right? And that information is what the British are going to be feeding to the Americans to get them involved in the war. Right? So again, against the rules of war, Belgium was neutral, right? And the British start telling us all sorts of stories of what's going on. Now, these stories are based in fact, right? So we have our images here, right? The mad brute, right, as the German kind of King Kong looking image here. Over this way, we have the German dragging this woman, and there's flames all over the place. So we know bad things happened in Belgium, right? We're going to see a story here of how we know that these ideas of what was going on are going to be exaggerated in order to try and, pull at those heartstrings of the Americans to bring us into war. Something else to point out, anytime you see a pointed helmet, like in these two images, that is going to be a German soldier from World War I. That is going to help us when we look at political cartoons later on, right? So for one of these British exaggerated stories, this is just one of several, right? But this one does a really good job of giving us the idea and showing us that this is definitely exaggerated. Okay, so I'm going to read through it, all right, and you guys kind of figure out, like, well, why would it be, how do we know it's exaggerated? Because we definitely are going to know, right? The wife came out with a little suckling child. She put the child down and sprang at the Germans like a lioness. She clawed their faces. One of the Germans took a rifle and struck a tremendous blow with the butt of his gun on the head. Another took his bayonet and fixed it and thrust it through the child. He then put his rifle on his shoulder with the child upon it, its little arms stretched out once or twice, right? Now, obviously, a very grueling story here. However, the words they're using, right, spranging like a lioness, all these types of imagery and stuff like that. Think about like putting your little English literature hat on right now. You can definitely tell that this is exaggerated. It's not in hard evidence, not in hard facts. Now, quick warning on this one. All right, you're going to have a couple warnings here and there when we look at different pictures. There are political cartoons made about this story because a lot of times people aren't going to read stories. They want an image. Right, so here we have some images of that same story we just saw, right? And again, these are to get people, get their attention of what's happening, right? Now, obviously, these are not extremely realistic, at least this one is not here, right? But again, that idea of we can take those isms we talked about with imperialism. This is definitely humanitarianism trying to get people's attention, trying to get them to say, hey, we need to come in and stop what is happening in Belgium because, again, this country is neutral. They are not a part of this war. Okay. All right. So our next topic here is the sinking of Lusitania. This one you guys should be fairly familiar with. All right. The Lusitania was a ship that was going to Europe. It had Americans on board, British on board, French on board, and it is sunk by a German U-boat, right? Now we're going to get into a reading in a little bit that will give us the idea of really what's going on with the Lusitania. But the reason that the Germans sunk this boat is because it is filled with weapons going to the Allies. Of course, the Americans and the Allies are like, no, 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 there are no weapons on board. These are innocent people. Yes, the people on board were innocent. They did not know there were weapons on board, but the Americans are going to be making money on both sides of this war, and they're going to be shipping a lot of things all over the place. Okay, so with these U-boats or submarines, they come from the German word Unterseeboot. Right. Okay. So since German is very close to English, you should remember that from AP Human Geography. Unterseeboot is undersea boat. So that makes sense. Our map that we have going on here, all right, every dot is a ship that is sunk by a U-boat. So this is what we would call unrestricted submarine warfare. All right, so unrestricted submarine warfare is literally any boat that the Germans would see, they will sink it. Right, and so if you are an American boat that is trying to ship goods here and there, you're not going through the English Channel right here because there's all these boats that are sunk. You're going to try to go through the North Sea over this way to get to Germany so that you can trade over that way. Well, if you're the British, you don't want the Americans trading with your enemy, so they're going to have a blockade here of the North Sea to stop us. So we only have access to trade with the Allies, right? So kind of forcing our hand, if you will. Okay, our next topic, we have the Dumba affair. Dumba, this guy right here, he is the Austrian ambassador to the United States, and he is accused of espionage. Espionage is spying or sabotage, right? Now, what he wants to do is he tells all these American factories that their laborers are being treated poorly and that they should strike in order to get better pay, better hours, better conditions. Well, this is all true. They are being treated poorly. However, he's doing this not to help out the laborers. He's doing it because then if we don't have factories producing goods for war, then those goods for war cannot be sent to the Allies, and therefore it will help his side, which is the Central Powers. So he's sabotaging the Americans' war effort. Right? And our last cause of the war, last cause of the United States getting involved in war is the Zimmermann telegram. Definitely put big stars, glitter, and unicorns all around this one. This is really the big ticket item that gets us involved, right? So if you should be familiar about this from world history, but if not, we got a political cartoon to help us out. So remember that pointed hat, all right? Okay, pointed helmet. That is going to be a German, all right? Here we have a sombrero, so this is Mexico, all right? So essentially what it was is that this telegram was sent from Germany to Mexico saying that if Mexico joined the war on the German side and helped basically fight the United States, then if the Germans win, Mexico would get back all the land that they lost to the United States. Now, this letter does not get to Mexico, right? The British intercept it before it gets there, right? So they send it to the United States. They're like, oh my gosh, this is happening just right next door to you guys. And this ends up being, and definitely write this down, right, a violation of the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine said that if Europe got involved in the Western Hemisphere, it is an act of war. So this is really, all the other things add up to get us closer and closer to war. This is really the last straw, if you will, that gets us involved in actually declaring war against the Central Powers and joining the Allied side. Okay? So before we get to the home front, we're going to look at another reading here. All right, this is sourced from a historian. right? And from this source here, it's going to give us some more information of what's going on. So kind of, again, follow along with me as we read through. So we got President Wilson had promised that the United States would stay neutral in the war. But in April of 1917, the Germans had announced they would have their submarines sink any ships bringing supplies to their enemies, and they had sunk a number of merchant vessels. Wilson now said he must stand by the right of Americans to travel on merchant ships in the war zone. So we saw again those images of the maps of all the places that we had boats that were sunk. Okay, we have a historian. He points out that this was a rationalization of the flimsiest sort. The British had also been intruding on the rights of American citizens on the high seas, but Wilson was not suggesting we go to war with them. So again, Wilson's kind of already picked a side according to this historian. Right? The United States claims the Lusitania carried an innocent cargo, and therefore the torpedoing of was a monstrous German atrocity. The Lusitania was actually heavily armed. We got shells, casings, cartridges, all right, small arms ammunition, right? Okay, the British and American governments lied about the cargo, right? Again, they want to make a lot of money on this, and the British want to keep bringing in more supplies for them in their war efforts. Right? Prosperity depended much on foreign markets. It was believed by the leaders of the country in 1897 private foreign investments of the United States amounted to about $700 million. By 1914, it was 3.5 million. So Americans are investing in these countries that are at war, right? And they have a lot of American money over there. So think commercialism as kind of a cause to get us involved. Right? With World War I, England became more and more a market for American goods and for loans at interest. J.P. Morgan and Company, J.P. Morgan's getting involved, right, acted as agents for the Allies, and when in 1915 Wilson lifted the ban on private bank loans to the Allies, Morgan could now begin lending money in such great amounts as to make great profit and tie Americans financially closely to the interest of British victory in the war against Germany, right? So yes, the Lusitania was sunk, right? And this actually it upset many, many Americans because there was people that died who were innocent, but it was carrying cargo, and J.P. Morgan, that robber baron, is investing millions of dollars in Europe and in the British in particular. So this gives us another layer, if you will, to why the United States gets involved in World War I. If we really were being completely honestly neutral, then we would never have gotten involved, right? But now, right, we have an interest of what's going on. This also gives us an idea of why then the Germans might be wanting to get the Mexicans involved to try and kind of deal with us or distract us, if you will, because they knew this information as well, okay? So again, another good layer here of what's happening historically without just taking everything at face value, okay? Right, so now we're going to get into the home front. We're going to focus on economics, social, and political. All right, going to be our three main things. All right, we're going to see lots of political posters during this time period because that is the major point of advertisement at the time. So our famous poster here of "I Want You" for the U.S. Army with Uncle Sam is actually from World War I, but we're going to recycle it and use it in World War II again because, you know, we like it. Why not? Okay, so let's start off with economics. So we have the War Industries Board, right? Both world wars will have a war industry board, and this is going to basically take all your factories to, instead of making domestic products, are now going to be making products for war. If you've been watching the news lately, there was a production act that was enacted by the president recently to make it where factories like Ford and GM needed to be starting to make ventilators and things like that that we need right now. This is a very similar connection to this War Industries Board, right? So definitely kind of a complexity point type of thing to be adding in here as connecting this War Industries Board to what is currently happening in our country. Now, at the time, for this war, we're going to increase production. We have no unemployment because we just need more and more people working on the job. Now, through this, we're going to be rationing. Rationing means to limit the amount of goods that you can get, right? We can also relate that to today, is that if you would go to the store, you're only allowed to get one container of toilet paper and one thing of hand sanitizer if they are there. And the reason for rationing is because if somebody starts to take a lot of those products and hoards them, then other people that might need them don't have access. So we can definitely relate to current times with the idea of rationing, right? Now, Prohibition, obviously, we're going to talk about more of that with the 1920s, but Prohibition, the 18th Amendment, will be passed here during the beginning of World War I, and the reason for it is because alcohol is made out of grains. So if we are able to ration grains, we can use all of that to actually use it as food, send it to Europe to help out the war effort, right? So this is not passed because of all of those anti-alcohol ideas that we saw before in temperance, right? This is going to be more of an idea of rationing the materials that it is made out of. Now, as a quick side note, Prohibition is set with the 18th Amendment. What ends Prohibition will be the 21st Amendment. It is really easy for us to remember because 21 is the drinking age. So nice little, side note there to help us remember. Okay, our next thing we got with social is new job opportunities. So we talked a little bit before about the Great Migration in the progressive video. All right, now with that Great Migration, we have all these African Americans moving from the South to these northern cities. And again, this is going to ramp up with the First World War because all these factories have job opportunities, job openings. So it's going to be a lot of people that are going to be going to those places. Also, we're going to see a lot of women joining the Navy. Now, they're not joining the Navy to be cooks or to be soldiers or anything like that. They're going to be joining the Navy to be nurses and for clerical staff. Right. If even today, a lot of times on Navy ships, the cooks are men. Right. So, but mostly nurses and clerical staff. Now, even though we have all these great things happening, there are some stories of the Harlem Hellfighters. This is an all African American pilot group during the war. We are still going to see racial tension that is happening in the United States. We're going to see that in segregated units. So we're going to have a picture of that real quick, right? And so here is a group of African Americans going to war, except you can tell from the picture they're not soldiers. They are going to be the band. So more of entertainment than soldiers fighting side by side. So again, for any step we get forward, we are taking 2 steps back, it seems. Right now, again, another warning for some pictures here, all right, because with this racial tension, we're going to talk about some horrible racist things that are happening at this time in the United States, right? And that's dealing with Red Summer. Now, Red Summer is the summer of 1919 to 1920, this time period right at the end of World War I. And this is where we're going to have race riots throughout the United States in several major cities. A lot of these are going to be based in job scarcity, all right, and that you have soldiers coming back home and that their jobs that they had left are now being filled due to these people moving from the Great Migration, and that economic uncertainty and racism that was underlying already is going to explode, and we're going to see these horrible race riots throughout the entire country. So we are going to look at some things that are going to go along with that. Okay, so for this particular reading here, so again, we had our source, we always want to look at that first. All right, newspaper from 1919. Okay, all right, and so we have since 1915, the colored population of Chicago had more than doubled, increasing in 4 years from a little over 50,000 to what is now estimated between 125,000 and 150,000. Most blacks lived in the area called the Black Belt. All right, so think back, so real quick, if a pause, right, think back to AP Human Geography, think about redlining, right, and things that you've talked about that, of segregated societies, of where things are. This is where you're going to see a lot of this stuff start. Okay, all right, so we people are living in this place called the Black Belt. Already overcrowded, this so-called Black Belt could not possibly hold the double-colored population. One cannot put 10 gallons of water in a 5-gallon pail. Whites who were afraid that blacks would move out of the Black Belt and into white neighborhoods had formed the Property Owners Association to keep blacks out of white neighborhoods. They discussed ways to keep Negroes in their part of town. In a number of cases during the period from January of 1918 to August of 1919, there were bombings of colored homes and houses occupied by Negroes outside of the Black Belt. During this period, no less than 20 bombings took place, yet only 2 persons have been arrested, and neither of the 2 have been convicted. Right? So even places where there weren't straight out violence and killing of black people, you're going to have this kind of forcing people out of different communities. Here we have a picture, all right, of all of these houses that are in a black neighborhood in Tulsa, right, that are being burned, right. There is many current podcasts that talk about the Tulsa race riots that happened in the early 1920s. If you're interested in these things and want to know more, definitely send me a message on Remind or in an email, I can find one for you. But there's lots of new information that people just recently have been finding out about what's happened in Tulsa back in the early 20s. And that's because this area was a very prominent African-American influential area of the country. And after these riots happened and just whole sections of this community were burned, it set everything back quite a long period of time. But there's all sorts of new stuff that people are finding out about this particular this town and this particular event. So again, if you're interested in finding more about that, of some history that's not as well known, definitely send me a message and I will try to get that to you. Okay, so here's another map. We saw one sort of similar to this earlier, but just to kind of give us an idea of the Great Migration of where people are moving to. So again, all of these are your major cities throughout the north and through the west, right? And they're all leaving this southern part of the U.S. Again, that push factor, pushing people away, is going to be sharecropping, racism, the boll weevil that's eating all of the cotton, right? And then what's pulling people to these northern cities is going to be those jobs, all right, going to someplace new, starting out on a fresh start. Okay. For other things going on with with our social impacts is going to be now the Red Scare. Now, real quick, red over here for Red Summer is red for blood and violence. Red Scare here is dealing with communism, right? So red communism. So definitely make a note of those two so you don't mix up the idea of them both using the term red in there for a description. All right, so the Red Scare we know is fear of communism. This starts after 1917 when we have the Russian Revolution, when the Russians then become a communist country. Okay, now a lot of people always ask like, well, why are we scared of communism, right? So a really simplistic way to think about this is that we have to be against communism because we are a communist, or we're not a communist country, we're a capitalist country. Now, if we think back to the time period of the Gilded Age when we are these ultra capitalists. So think of the robber barons, the captains of industry, Rockefeller, Carnegie, all of those types of guys, is that they need the United States to stay a capitalistic society because otherwise they will not make as much money. Right? And then we saw with Rockefeller that cartoon of the octopus that had its tentacles in all these different parts of society and in government. That means that then they are controlling that government, and this is all about that flow of money. If they do not stay capitalist, they will become poor and they will not be in power anymore. So really it's a struggle of who's in power, and then whatever philosophy they want to have in the United States is what we are going to keep. I realize it's extremely simplistic, but if you have questions about these things, definitely send them to me. I will try to explain this stuff to you as best I can. Right now with this is that we have this guy Palmer, right? So this guy, his name is A. Mitchell Palmer. He's the Attorney General of the United States, and he is going to try to be hunting down communists. Now, a lot of times when we're finding these communists are going to be in labor unions. So think of the socialist labor unions like the IWW, the Wobblies, right? Now with this Attorney General Palmer is he actually is in the midst of trying to find these anarchists and communists. His house is going to be bombed, and it's going to be bombed by this anarchist group. So not a communist group, not a socialist labor union group. And so from then he has this really entrenched distrust of people who are foreign, and he is very much against all of these different groups that are trying to help out people who are foreigners to the United States. Later on, he will also be hunting people that are like criminals and stuff like that in the 1920s, and he will be one of the people that kind of start the creation of the FBI. Right, so we'll see this name pop up again, right? And our last thing for social, well, almost to our last thing for social, right? Our next topic, the Spanish flu, right? Or the influenza of 1918, right? Now, obviously, we can relate this to today, right? Because it's been in the news a lot, right? A lot of people called it the Spanish flu because they blamed it coming from Spain. We know that that is not the correct terminology for it. We want to use influenza of 1918 because we realize, especially now, that diseases do not care about political boundaries. So this is why we call this disease that we have coronavirus or COVID-19, not the Chinese flu. So again, kind of some connections we can make with that. Here you can pause on this to read through what's going on with the influenza of 1918, but again, some similarities of what we got going on, and even a little bit of dark humor here, all right, because, you know, that's what people do when times are difficult, right? Or for all of us, we just watch Tiger King, which is amazing. Okay, now for our next thing for social, all right, is that many German Americans during this time period will be attacked just because they are German. This is when you start to see a lot of German families start to change their names. So they might drop von from their name. They're going to stop speaking German. They are going to try to assimilate and become as American as possible, right? So you will see some, even though they are small, right, you will see some lynchings of German Americans in the United States. So like we have this picture here with Uncle Sam, right? And we also see this anti-German propaganda sort of happening. Instead of being German cabbage and German measles, we're going to call them Liberty cabbage and Liberty measles. I know it seems a little funny, but we do the same thing after September 11th. After September 11th, the French government was not going to help the United States in all the things that we wanted to do, especially dealing with the war in Afghanistan that was starting. And so we, in Congress, at the restaurants inside of the Capitol, they will change them from being called French fries into freedom fries. I can't make this stuff up, so it's one of those things that we do this, you know, kind of as a show of, you know, solidarity against a common enemy, if you will. All right, so for our political section here, all right, we have the Sedition Act and the Espionage Act. All right, so we've seen a Sedition Act before that was with John Adams way, way back in the day. All right, and that is that if you speak out against your government or try to sabotage your government by saying things, that you can be arrested. This goes against the First Amendment. However, we are going to see this court case here where we're going to kind of modify that a little bit. The Espionage Act we saw a little bit earlier with the Dumba affair, right? And so espionage is spying or sabotaging your government. Eugene Debs, right, that labor socialist leader who ran for president for 4 times, will actually be arrested under this Espionage Act, and we'll see some quotes from him shortly, right? Now this court case here, Schneck versus the United States of 1919, right, is going to basically call out saying that yes, the Sedition Act is allowed. It's not violating the First Amendment, and let's see what reasoning they're going to use. So the Chief Justice at the time is Oliver Wendell Holmes, all right, and he says, quote, all right, free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing panic. Right? So basically, you can say things against your government. However, if you're saying something false, right, that would cause panic, right, that is not allowed. Think today how if you go to an airport, right, you can't say the word bomb, right? That would definitely get you in trouble, right? So again, that idea of setting up panic, right, that is where your First Amendment rights do stop. Now, it kind of gets this idea or this precedent of clear and present danger. All right, so unless there is clear and present danger, all right, and you're saying something that might cause panic, right, it is not allowed. So our political cartoon we got here, we got Uncle Sam, and there is a fly on his forehead, and he's hitting the fly with a hammer. All right, and so it says 2 drastic sedition legislation, and it says then swat the fly, but use common sense. So this cartoonist is basically saying that this Sedition Act is a bit too much because it would be like if you're trying to swat a fly with a hammer. All right, so again, a bit extreme, if you will. Okay, so let's see what Eugene Debs did that got him arrested. All right, so we're going to see a couple quotes from him. All right, so he gave this speech in Canton, Ohio, against World War I, right? So we're going to have some quotes from him. So we got, to hell with war, to hell who all who crave it. When masters rule the world no more, we'll need no wars to save it. Kind of sounds a little like Dr. Seuss. But he basically is saying, he's like, you know, when these people that have all this money stop ruling the world, we will not need no wars. Okay. All right. And his other one here definitely goes along with his labor union past, is those who produce should have, but we know that those who produce the most, that is those who work the hardest and at the most difficult and most menial tasks, have the least. So it's the idea that the people who are working, the workers, all of us, are the ones that are working the hardest, but we have the least. Okay, these things undermined the United States' ability to carry on a war, and so they were considered, since it's undermining or sabotaging the war, that he was violating the Espionage Act and will spend some time in jail where he will run for president again. Right. Our last thing for politics is the 19th Amendment will be passed here at the end of the First World War. We saw that a little bit earlier with the Progressive Era, but here is one of the close-ups of one of the signs that women had when they were protesting in front of the White House. So instead of it saying President Wilson, it's Kaiser Wilson. So like Kaiser Wilhelm, the leader of Germany at the time. And it's this whole idea that you have all these people in the United States are not self-governed, but you go to war saying we're going to defend democracy around the world, but you don't defend democracy here. And so the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. However, it was considered a quote-unquote war measure by President Wilson, even though we know that there were women that were being arrested and held in prison, right, trying to gain this right to vote. Okay, so our next topic we're going to have is we're going to briefly go over the end of the war. All right, so we're going to go over the main things happening with the end of this war, the treaty, and what happens with the United States. So the first thing is Woodrow Wilson had that plan for the end of the war, and his plan at the end of the war for everlasting peace is the 14 points, right? These 14 points have all sorts of things in them. One of the major topics is a League of Nations, all right? So that's going to be one of the major things we're going to focus on, right? The group of people that are going to negotiate the end of the war are the Big Four. So these four guys right here, right? And their country flags are right here. So the United States, Italy, France, and Great Britain. Okay, and at the end of the war, it is considered an armistice or a ceasefire, right? And the treaty that ends the war is the Treaty of Versailles. So it's not a Treaty of Paris, we're just outside of Paris, right? So we're going to talk about several things in the Treaty of Versailles. Again, very brief type of analysis over this, all right? So first off, we're going to have a bunch of new countries are going to be created, right? We're going to look at a map real quick, right? So on our map here, these are all the yellow countries that we have, right? And Ireland over here. The biggest things I want you guys to kind of look at with this map that are interesting is these outlines of different colors. So the green outline is what the German Empire was before the war, right? And then after the war, they lost this area here to become part of Poland, right? The Russians or the Soviets, right, okay, are going to be this purple line. So they lost a lot of land here. And then the orange line here is going to be the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. They're totally broken up, so they cannot have another war. And then over here is the Ottoman Empire in red, right? So at this time period is when all these European powers that are negotiating this treaty are going to start dividing up parts of what we call the Middle East, right? And so that's why the people that lived there had no choices in where they drew these lines, but those lines are going to create problems later. So, and again, for stuff like that, for more detail, definitely go and look into your stuff from world history and look up some videos from world history crash courses. Okay, so for our Treaty of Versailles, again, this is a very brief overview of this. Again, mostly focusing on the American perspective. So Germany will be blamed for the war. France is really going to be adamant about that, and they are really adamant about making sure that they pay reparations because the country of France is completely destroyed. There's trenches all over the place. Millions of people are dead. And so the amount that is supposed to be paid is $269 billion. The Germans don't have this, so they start printing money. It causes extreme hyperinflation. This is not good. So you have this picture here of this guy using German marks as wallpaper. Okay, now the part we want to really focus on here is with the League of Nations, because that's really going to be where the United States gets involved. All right, the League of Nations is Article X or Article 10 of the Treaty of Versailles. So remember, there was originally like 14 points. This would be like number 10, right, is where we're getting that number from, right? And this League of Nations really bothers the United States, and they refuse to sign the treaty. So the United States never signed the Treaty of Paris that ended World War I. Right? We refused to sign it because of the addition of this League of Nations, right? So we have three things going on down here, right? So first off, we have a senator, right? Henry Cabot Lodge, and he is a reservationist. So we're going to put these two guys together, okay? Kind of tie them together here, right? So he is the chairman for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, right? And he opposes this League of Nations, right? And basically what a reservationist means, right, is that you're reserved, right? You're like, hey, I'm okay with signing this treaty, but I don't like this League of Nations. So if he's reserved, he's saying, I will sign the treaty if the League of Nations is removed. Okay? But if it's not removed, I'm not going to sign it. So if it's removed, I'm willing to sign it. Then you got another group that's a bit more extreme, the irreconcilables. They cannot be reconciled, right? They're basically saying, no matter what you do, I'm never going to sign this treaty, period. Well, the League of Nations is never removed from the treaty, and so the United States never signs this document, ever. There's going to be some videos here, so you can see this one right here. I'm going to put those in the description below, so definitely watch those. But yeah, we never signed the Treaty of Versailles. Our last thing we're going to look at is two political cartoons dealing with that League of Nations. So here we have in the middle, this is Uncle Sam, and Uncle Sam is his hands are tied by the League of Nations, and all these other countries are pulling at him. And the reason we were scared of the League of Nations is we thought it would become an alliance, a permanent alliance, and would get us dragged into another war. We're finally paying attention to what Washington told us in his farewell address, that, hey, if you have a permanent alliance, bad things could happen. And our last one, and I have a soft spot for this cartoon just because I think it's so funny. We have Uncle Sam here. He is getting married to foreign entanglements, is what it says on her dress. And the guy that's marrying them, his book, it's not the Bible, it is the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is getting us tied to foreign entanglements. And the ceremony is at the spot where they ask if anybody has anything to say and these two shouldn't be married, speak now or forever hold your peace. And the U.S. Senate, so this is going to be Henry Cabot Lodge, is going to be busting through the window saying, stop, don't marry her. So a bit dramatic, but, gets the point across. So again, this is going to be the end of our video for World War I. And again, it's quick and dirty and that sort of thing. If you have questions, definitely send them to me. We are going to do a little review of this stuff towards the end of the week before we get to spring break, right? So until then, I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.